The medieval mystery of King Henry I's horrific death. In the winter of 1135, in a hunting lodge in Normandy, one of medieval Europe's most powerful monarchs lay dying in the most horrifying way imaginable. His body, bloated and discoloured, emitted such a putrid stench that attendants could barely stand to remain in the room. His flesh had begun to rot while he was still alive, turning black and sloughing off in pieces. The physicians, helpless before this mysterious affliction, could do nothing but watch as their king literally decomposed before their eyes. This was not a death that came swiftly in battle or peacefully in sleep. This was a prolonged descent into living decay that would haunt those who witnessed it for the rest of their lives. The king was Henry I of England, known as Henry Beauclerc, Henry Good Scholar, one of the most capable rulers of the medieval period. He was 67 years old, which was remarkably elderly for his era, and had ruled England for 35 years with an iron fist and a calculating mind. He had survived countless political intrigues, defeated his own brothers in battle, and transformed England into a centrally governed, efficiently taxed kingdom. He had fathered at least 25 children, though only 2 were legitimate, crushed rebellions, and expanded his continental holdings. This was a man who seemed indomitable, a survivor who had outlasted nearly everyone who had opposed him. And yet, in the end, his body betrayed him in the most grotesque manner possible. This is the story of what killed Henry I, and why his death became one of the most infamous medical mysteries of the Middle Ages. A cautionary tale about medieval medicine, dietary excess, and the fragility of even the most powerful human beings. The story of Henry's death begins, according to medieval chroniclers, with a meal. Not just any meal, but a feast featuring his favourite delicacy, lampreys. If you're not familiar with lampreys, consider yourself fortunate. These are eel-like parasitic fish with circular mouths full of teeth, arranged in concentric rings, designed to latch onto other fish and suck their blood. They look like something from a nightmare, prehistoric horrors that have remained essentially unchanged for hundreds of millions of years. Despite their horrifying appearance, lampreys were considered a delicacy in medieval Europe, particularly among the nobility. They were rich, fatty, and expensive, a luxury food that demonstrated wealth and refined taste. Henry I loved them, and despite his physicians' repeated warnings that lampreys disagreed with him, he refused to give them up. In late November or early December 1135, while staying at his hunting lodge near Lyon-la-Forêt in Normandy, Henry indulged in what chroniclers described as a surfeit of lampreys. He ate too many of them. The Anglo-Norman chronicler Henry of Huntingdon recorded that the king ate of the dish excessively, though his physicians advised him against it. Another chronicler, William of Malmesbury, confirmed that lampreys always disagreed with him, but that the king ate them anyway, for he would not deny his appetite for the sake of his health. This sounds like a simple case of food poisoning or indigestion, the kind of thing that might lay someone low for a few days. But what happened next was far worse than ordinary food poisoning. According to the chronicles, Henry was immediately seized with violent illness. He developed a fever, severe abdominal pain, and began vomiting. His condition rapidly deteriorated in ways that terrified his attendants. Within days, something horrifying became apparent. The king's body had begun to rot while he still lived. His skin turned dark and mottled. The smell of decay emanated from him, so strong that servants and physicians struggled to remain in his presence. Parts of his flesh became necrotic, dead tissue turning black and beginning to separate from living tissue. The king was literally decomposing before anyone's eyes, yet he remained conscious and aware of what was happening to him. For about a week, Henry lingered in this nightmarish state. The pain must have been excruciating. Medieval medicine had little to offer for pain relief beyond wine, opium tinctures, if available, and prayer. Henry, who had faced death in battle multiple times without flinching, was reduced to a suffering, rotting shell of himself. On December 1st, 1135, Henry I finally died. But the horror didn't end there. Even in death, Henry's body continued to decay at an alarming rate. Medieval custom dictated that a king's body should be prepared for burial, transported to his chosen resting place, in Henry's case Reading Abbey in England, and displayed for mourners to pay respects. But Henry's corpse presented unprecedented problems. The body was so putrid, so thoroughly decomposed, that the embalmers faced a nearly impossible task. Medieval embalming involved removing the internal organs, treating the body cavity with various preservatives, salt, spices, aromatic herbs, and preparing the corpse for the journey to its final resting place. But Henry's body was already in such an advanced state of decay that even beginning this process was dangerous. One chronicler, Orderic Vitalis, recorded what happened next in gruesome detail. A physician, some accounts say it was a surgeon, was assigned the grim task of opening the king's body to remove the organs for separate burial, a common practice for royalty. Organs would be buried in one location, the body in another. The moment the physician made his first incision, he was overwhelmed by a pestilential stench, so powerful that it literally killed him. Orderic wrote that the man died within a week from exposure to the noxious fumes from the king's corpse. This isn't just medieval superstition or exaggeration. While the precise cause of the physician's death is unknown, exposure to a severely decomposed body can be genuinely dangerous. The gases produced by putrefaction, including hydrogen sulfide, methane, ammonia, and various sulfur compounds, are not only foul-smelling, but can be toxic in high concentrations. Hydrogen sulfide in particular can cause respiratory failure, unconsciousness, and death. In an enclosed medieval room with poor ventilation, the concentration of these gases could potentially have been dangerous, especially if the physician's face was close to the body cavity when he opened it. The embalmers eventually completed their grim work, though how many more might have been sickened in the process, the chronicles don't say. Henry's remains were wrapped, placed in a lead coffin — the lead would help contain the smell — and transported across the English Channel to Reading. Even sealed in lead, the smell reportedly persisted. The funeral procession must have been a surreal and unpleasant affair, with mourners keeping their distance from a coffin that continued to emit the stench of decay. Henry was finally laid to rest at Reading Abbey, which he had founded. His tomb was later destroyed during Henry VIII's dissolution of the monasteries in the 16th century, and his remains were lost, perhaps a mercy, given the state they were in. For nearly 900 years, historians and medical experts have debated what actually killed Henry I. The chronicles agree on the basic facts. He ate lampreys, became violently ill, and his body began to rot while he still lived. But the medical explanation for this horrifying sequence of events remains uncertain. Let's examine the leading theories. Theory 1. Food poisoning. The most obvious explanation is that Henry suffered severe food poisoning from contaminated lampreys. Lampreys are bottom feeders that can accumulate toxins and bacteria. If the fish Henry ate was spoiled or improperly prepared, they could have caused serious gastrointestinal illness. However, ordinary food poisoning doesn't typically cause the living body to rot. While severe food poisoning can certainly be fatal, particularly from bacteria like Clostridium botulinum, botulism, or Salmonella, it doesn't usually cause the rapid necrosis of tissues described in the chronicles. Food poisoning might have been the trigger, but something else must have been going on to explain the horrifying progression of Henry's death. Theory 2. Septic shock and necrotizing infection. A more plausible explanation is that Henry developed a severe infection, possibly triggered by the initial food poisoning, that led to septic shock and necrotizing fasciitis, the so-called flesh-eating disease. Necrotizing fasciitis is a rare but devastating bacterial infection that causes rapid death of soft tissue. It can be caused by various bacteria, including Streptococcus and Clostridium species. The bacteria produce toxins that destroy tissue and blood vessels, cutting off blood supply and causing large areas of flesh to die and turn black. The infection spreads rapidly and is often fatal, even with modern antibiotic treatment. In a 67-year-old man, in 1135, with no antibiotics or effective treatments available, necrotizing fasciitis would have been a death sentence. The symptoms match the chronicle's descriptions: rapid deterioration, fever, skin discoloration, necrotic tissue, and horrific smell. The infection produces gases that cause bloating and generate the putrid odour associated with gangrene. Could lampreys have introduced the bacteria that caused such an infection? Possibly, If the fish were contaminated, or if Henry had some existing wound or vulnerability that allowed bacteria to enter his system, the infection could have taken hold quickly. His advanced age and possibly compromised immune system would have made him particularly vulnerable. Theory 3. Acute pancreatitis. Another theory, proposed by some medical historians, is that Henry suffered acute pancreatitis, a sudden inflammation of the pancreas that can be triggered by rich fatty foods and alcohol. The pancreas produces digestive enzymes, and when it becomes inflamed, these enzymes can begin digesting the pancreas itself and surrounding tissues. Essentially, the body begins to digest itself from the inside. Severe acute pancreatitis can cause tissue necrosis, multi-organ failure, and death. The symptoms include severe abdominal pain, fever, vomiting, and, in advanced cases, skin discoloration as tissues die. The condition can progress rapidly and was almost always fatal in the pre-modern era. Lampreys are extremely fatty, and if Henry overindulged, as the chronicles state he did, this could have triggered an attack of pancreatitis, particularly if he had underlying pancreatic issues or gallstones. The rotting alive described in the chronicles could have been the visible manifestation of extensive internal tissue necrosis caused by pancreatic enzymes escaping into the abdominal cavity and surrounding tissues. Theory 4. Poisoning. Given Henry's political situation and the turbulent nature of medieval succession, some historians have suggested he might have been deliberately poisoned. Henry had many enemies, and his death triggered a succession crisis that plunged England into nearly 2 decades of civil war, known as the Anarchy. However, poison is an unlikely explanation for several reasons. First, the chroniclers, who were generally eager to report conspiracy and intrigue, presented the lampreys as the cause, not suspicious foul play. Second, the specific symptoms, the rapid necrosis and putrefaction, don't match most known medieval poisons. Third, Henry died surrounded by his household, and poisoning a king in his own lodge would have been extraordinarily difficult. That said, we can't entirely rule out the possibility that the lampreys themselves were deliberately contaminated with something, or that Henry's illness was exploited by someone who prevented him from receiving proper care. But direct assassination seems unlikely. The most likely answer, the most probable explanation, combining elements of several theories, is that Henry suffered severe food poisoning from contaminated lampreys, which triggered or exacerbated an underlying condition, possibly pancreatitis, possibly a gallbladder issue, which then led to a catastrophic bacterial infection. At 67, with decades of rich eating and heavy drinking behind him, Henry's body was likely already compromised. The lampreys were the final insult to an aging system that couldn't recover. The rapid necrosis and putrefaction were probably the result of necrotizing infection, combined with the body's failure to fight it off due to age, septic shock, and possibly diabetic or other metabolic complications, undiagnosed of course in 1135. The infection overwhelmed his system so completely that decomposition began even before clinical death. Henry's death illustrates the profound limitations of medieval medicine when confronted with serious illness. Despite being one of the most powerful and wealthy men in Europe, despite having access to the best physicians available, Henry received essentially no effective treatment for his condition. Medieval medicine was based largely on the ancient Greek theory of humours, the idea that health depended on balancing 4 bodily fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Treatment consisted primarily of bloodletting, purging, and administering various herbal preparations, most of which had little real therapeutic value. When Henry fell ill, his physicians would have tried bloodletting to balance his humours. They might have given him purgatives to induce vomiting or diarrhea, attempting to expel whatever bad substances were causing his illness. They would have prescribed various herbal remedies and special diets. They would have prayed. None of it would have helped. They had no concept of bacteria or infection. They couldn't diagnose pancreatitis or septic shock. They had no antibiotics, no anti-inflammatories beyond willow bark, a natural source of aspirin-like compounds. No way to perform emergency surgery safely. They could only watch as their patient deteriorated. The physician who died from exposure to Henry's corpse represents another aspect of medieval medicine's limitations: the lack of understanding about disease transmission and the dangers of exposure to decomposition. Medieval people knew that corpses smelled bad and that disease could somehow spread, but they didn't understand pathogens or take adequate precautions when dealing with infectious material. Henry's death didn't just end one life, it triggered a political catastrophe. Henry's only legitimate son, William Adelin, had died in the White Ship disaster in 1120, leaving Henry without a male heir. He had designated his daughter Matilda as his successor and forced his barons to swear loyalty to her. But medieval England had never been ruled by a queen regnant, and many barons were uncomfortable with the idea. When Henry died, his nephew Stephen of Blois rushed to England and seized the throne, claiming that Henry had changed his mind on his deathbed and named Stephen as his heir. Matilda disputed this, and England plunged into a civil war that lasted from 1135 to 1153, a period known as the Anarchy. The Anarchy was devastating. Chroniclers described it as a time when Christ and his saints slept, a period of lawlessness, castle building by private lords, economic collapse, and widespread suffering. Crops were destroyed, villages burned, and people starved. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle recorded that men said openly that Christ and his saints were asleep. All of this might have been avoided if Henry had lived longer and established a clearer succession, or if he had simply resisted eating those damned lampreys. The fate of thousands hung on one old king's inability to control his appetite for a delicacy his physicians had warned him against. What can we learn from Henry I's grotesque death nearly 900 years later? First, it reminds us of the fragility of human power. Henry I was as powerful as a human being could be in the 12th century. A king who commanded armies, made and broke nobles, accumulated vast wealth. Yet all that power couldn't save him from a bad meal and the limitations of medieval medicine. In the end, biology is the great equalizer. Bacteria don't care about crowns. Second, it illustrates how far medicine has come. Today, Henry's condition, whether food poisoning, pancreatitis, or necrotizing infection, would almost certainly be treatable. Antibiotics would fight infection, anti-inflammatories would reduce tissue damage, and modern supportive care, 1,5 fluids, pain management possibly, surgery would give him an excellent chance of survival. The physician who died from exposure to the corpse would have been wearing protective equipment that would have kept him safe. The gap between medieval and modern medicine is almost unimaginable. Third, the story highlights the danger of ignoring medical advice, even, or especially, when you're powerful enough that no one can force you to listen. Henry's physicians warned him repeatedly that lampreys disagreed with him. He ignored them because he was king and could do as he pleased. His death might have been avoided if he'd simply listened to the experts he employed. Finally, Henry's death reminds us that history often turns on small, almost random events. If Henry had chosen different food that day, if he'd listened to his doctors, if he'd survived a few more years, England might have avoided the anarchy entirely. The course of English history, possibly even the development of common law and parliamentary government that would later spread around the world, might have been different. Enormous consequences can flow from seemingly trivial choices. Henry I's death became legendary in medieval chronicles, repeated and embellished over the centuries. The image of the king rotting alive, of the physician killed by the corpse's fumes, captured medieval imaginations and served as a cautionary tale about gluttony, pride, and mortality. Modern historians and medical researchers continue to debate the exact cause of death, using the fragmentary evidence from medieval chronicles to make educated guesses about what happened. New theories emerge periodically as our understanding of disease improves, but we'll never know with certainty what killed Henry I. We can only marvel at the gruesome detail with which his death was recorded and wonder at the horror of dying in such a manner. The next time you're tempted to dismiss medieval medicine as primitive superstition, remember Henry I. His death was real, his suffering genuine, and the helplessness of his physicians absolute. We live in an age of medical miracles that would seem like magic to them, antibiotics that can cure infections they could barely understand, pain relief beyond their wildest dreams, surgical techniques that would astound them. Henry I, King of England and Duke of Normandy, conqueror and administrator, died rotting alive because he ate too many lampreys. It's a death that seems almost too horrible to be true, yet the chronicles agree on the basic facts. In the end, the most powerful man in England died in the most powerless way imaginable, in pain, in decay, unable to do anything but endure, until death finally came as a mercy. The lampreys, for their part, survived as a delicacy. though Henry's death gave them a rather grim reputation. Subsequent English monarchs were more cautious about their lamprey consumption, though the fish remained popular. Today they're rarely eaten, which is probably just as well. Some medieval traditions are best left in the past, especially when they might cause you to rot alive.